Presented by Caltech.
So we had first Laurie with a kind of global outlook and a measurement network, and then two very interesting process-based talks on the sources and the sinks. And now we will go full circle back to like the global perspective from France.
Maybe.
And it's my pleasure to have Philippe Bousquet here from LSE. He's basically the methane guy in Paris, and he will talk about the global methane project, which he's basically leading.
Yes.
If he can start his laptop.
Yeah. With two difficulties, bringing you to lunch and talking about after Michael. So thanks for this very lightning talk. Maybe this is a bit strange. Yeah. Let's do it again. Okay, well, it's a big screen. So I will present you the Global Carbon Project Methane, the activities we had, and the main results and challenges we have. So it's a work done with a group, of course. I will show that just after. So the objective of the GCP methane on behalf of the GCP CO2, which you might know for some years, is really to stimulate the research on the methane cycle, which you have seen is very varied, from really the deep sediment to the atmospheric chemistry, and we have a lot of different topics and subjects. And people don't always meet with these different topics, which is nice in this workshop also, is that we can meet the different topics in the methane budget. Then, of course, is to produce regular updates, because we figure out that with CO2, the fact to have regular updates is quite important for the science, but also for the political implications and for the IPCC products. And to produce synthesis papers, and this is most of the plot I will show you are from the papers we already produced with the GCP methane, which has started like now 4 years ago. So we have a group of scientists, you will see the name just after, and we try to exchange as far as we can do in meetings, in side events, and so on. So far we produced two budgets, one in 2013, one in 2016. There were 5 papers published or in review, 4 published and 1 still in review at the moment. And 2 are still in review actually at the moment. And we had several side events at AGU, and recently we obtained a grant from the Moore Foundation to sustain the work in different topics. So this is the group of people that have gathered the last budget. Some of them are in the room, of course. So it's 83 people from 15 countries. So it's quite a large group of people that represent the different components of the methane cycle, which, as I said, is very varied. So we produce also, of course, scientific papers, but also some outreach. You've already seen that, but I will show it again soon. And also we have some website for the outreach communication. So what do we do in this exercise is try to gather all the components, so atmospheric observations from the surface and the satellite, emission inventories, you have several for anthropogenic emissions, but also for fires or biofuel, biochemistry models and data-driven methods for the bottom-up approaches. So in this exercise we have 11 wetland models, we have a model for termites, and we have other sources from the literature at the moment. Of course, methane sinks, we've seen the importance of that just in the talk before. So we have taken that from the previous budget. In this budget, we didn't address directly these methane sinks. Also, I will give you some elements on that. And of course, this is the bottom-up budget. And if we combine these different elements and try to optimize the emissions, we do the so-called top-down budget. Just an illustration of what is this bottom-up and top-down. So in the bottom-up exercise, we have a land surface model that computes the methane fluxes based on some forcing meteorological data, some assimilation data to constrain the parameters of these models, but also flux towers at the surface and inventories, forest inventories, for instance. And then from this, we produce CH4. And we validate these models using independent flux measurements, very few. It has been said already. This is one of the main limitations so far to really improve these models, and other satellite data not used in the assimilation. So this is a top-down for wetlands. You can do some top-downs for freshwater. So far, it's mostly data-driven extrapolations, for instance, for these freshwater systems. Also, for geological sources, you can do some data-driven extrapolations. For top-down, the idea is based on an atmospheric model, transport and chemistry. The idea is really to optimally combine a previous knowledge on the emissions, atmospheric observations. It can be either satellite data or surface data or both when the biases allows to do that. And I just mentioned ICOS here, which is the European effort to try to gather and make it more consistent all the GHG, greenhouse gas measurements in Europe. It's a building project. And so we combine these different elements into the model, and with some optimization of a cost function, try to reduce the size of this cost function to produce CH4 fluxes at model resolution, for instance, or by region process. It depends on the method that is used, plus uncertainties. And the validation of this is made on independent atmospheric observation, not used there, and also on satellite data, not used there eventually. So for methane, we are quite in a good shape for observations in the atmosphere. It was shown by Laurie. We have this surface network. Of course, we have FLASK, we have continuous now, and it's really high precision and accuracy data. And this is really a chance to have these data sets, long-term data sets, although it is unevenly spatiotemporal sampling at the moment. We also have, of course, the satellite. So the Skamaki 1, the historic series, which has brought a lot of information on the spatiotemporal distribution of things for the emissions. But it has the caveat to have some kind of large bias that we have to correct in the inverse procedure, and it's not so easy. So recently we have the GOSAT, of course, satellite, which offers lower bias and allows to really now start to work not completely at the same level yet, I would say, in terms of accuracy as surface network, but still helps a lot. So this situation is not so bad compared to CO2, for instance, where we see with OCO2, the difficulty to really go towards useful information for the surface emissions. So I will present in this short course the results we got from the budget, so kind of decadal budget, the last one we produced, and also about the emission changes. So you already seen that. I will not go through the sources that Laurie presented. Just to mention the three big ones. In anthropogenic, you have the fossil fuel usage, agriculture and waste here around 180 teragrams, and the wetland that Patrick already mentioned, around 67, sorry. So the total emission are about 560 teragrams seen by this top-down budget, and the methyl chloroform constraint OH is about this size, and you have the growth rate in the atmosphere, which is the balance between the sources and the sinks. I would like here to focus more on the difference between this top-down and bottom-up budget, and I can switch from one to the other. You will see where are the differences. So the main differences are really on this other natural emissions, which hide some important emissions from geological leaks, from lakes, from termites, from oceans, from permafrost. And you see that from the bottom-up point of view, it's much larger. It has been also evoked by Patrick, maybe double counting, maybe we don't really understand. And this is, I think, one of the main topics of the workshop to discuss. How do we reconcile, of course, these two numbers, 64 versus 200 in the system. Also, the sink here seen by process chemistry model, we saw by Michael that the range of this OH, TOH thing is quite large at the moment. So it means we have quite often uncertainty in this OH view from the process-based point of view, from the bottom-up point of view. And of course, the sum of the difference between sources and sinks does not match the atmosphere from this bottom-up model. So I think that still, if we can believe this really methyl chloroform constraint, at least for the mean value of the sink, we have some constraint on the total source. So we have to probably revise this number so to work on these discrepancies, because for other sources, discrepancies are not that big. So if we go to regional, you will see in green the wetland, in purple other natural sources, in blue the agriculture and waste, in gray the fossil, and then in red the biomass. So you see, not surprisingly, that the wetland dominates in the tropical systems, that the agriculture and waste is dominating here in China or in India, for instance, and that fossil fuel at mid-latitudes is the dominant contributors. This quite complex plot already shown by Patrick. It's a comparison for each source on each region from the ensemble of top-down and bottom-up studies we got. And it's really on the left for each source. The left is top-down. It will be the same in all the talk. and the right is bottom-up. So the two main discrepancies are really this Arctic discrepancy that Patrick already evoked before, and also in China, you see that you have a discrepancy between, also still consistent within the error bars, which are large, and we have to be modest, but still I would like to comment a bit more these two discrepancies. So from the inverse point of view here, this is so bottom-up point of view, sorry. This is the result from an ensemble of 11 wetland models that was gathered in this Poulter et al. Paper in revision at the moment. And you see that for the Arctic, you have these two emission values for Boreal North America and Boreal Eurasia that explain really this quite high value we have, although very, very uncertain. We have to be modest here. And Patrick evoked some possibilities to explain the discrepancy with the top-down, which are much lower for these two regions here. If you look at the Chinese emissions, again, this is a paper by Peng et al. That came up last year, where he tried to produce a county-based inventory for all the Chinese emissions, anthropogenic emissions. And he compares with the different studies that exist for China. So his study is the red one with the uncertainty, and then you have the EDGAR, the blue, US EPA, the dots, the blue dots, and then some other inventories, the diamonds here, and you have some IPCC is here, a range around. IPCC value, sorry, reported value with the range. What they come up with is that they have a reduction, as we see with the top-down value that we produce with the ensemble of studies, a reduction of the Chinese emission, also a reduction of the trend in the recent years. Which result that is now quite well accepted in the community, I think. And you see that the cause of this can be found between EDGAR, what is commonly used by inversers as a prior for the inversion, and what he finds. You can see you have to be careful of the scale, which are not the same, that the main differences come from the rice, the coal, and the wastewater here. These are explaining the main difference with the EDGAR inventory, and I will show you a plot at the end of the EDGAR inventory going with the new version. This is EDGAR 4.2 in the same direction of reduced Chinese emission compared to the previous inventories and reduced also trend. In this budget, we also revised the ocean emissions. It was already mentioned also by Patrick, this crazy number of 17 teragrams per year by Shakova in several papers. For ESIS zone, the Eastern Siberian Arctic shelves. Two recent papers revised these numbers towards smaller values. A paper by the group of Patrick, about 2.9 teragrams. And in my lab, we also worked on that from the atmospheric point of view, and we came up with a range between 0 to 4.5 teragrams. And indeed, what we did in this Berche paper is you have here, for instance, one station at Tixi in Siberia. The gray here is the observations, okay, and then you have the different component of the model. It's a 35 kilometer resolution model, regional model, Chimère, all around the Arctic. It's a polar model. And you see on the top of the baseline here, which is all what comes out of the Arctic, you have the contribution of the wetlands in green, and you have the contribution in blue of ESIS. If you put, I think in this case it's 8 only. Teragram per year value. So you see that there is no way we can reconcile the atmospheric, and this is continuous measurement. This is one use of the continuous measurement. These synoptic events in the continuous data. There is no way you can reproduce this ESIS strong variation at 8. So if you downscale this with a Purzman inversion, just optimizing the fit to the observations, you come up with this emission change. This is the Shakova range, and this is what we get, with the possibility that in summer we have some emission at a rate of 8 teragrams per year eventually, but only during 1 month. But then all the rest of the year it's much less than they found in this paper. So I think we now have an estimate for the ocean around 14 teragrams, but a narrower range than before. So these are the main conclusions we got from this methane budget. So of course the sustained atmospheric increase, the top-down budget around 560 teragrams, 60 of which are anthropogenic. The fact that the BU, the bottom-up, it's much larger global totals because of larger natural emission, especially freshwaters, and this question, the double counting and the way we do this, also method to extrapolate local measurements towards global values, all this has to be questioned, I think. Then where it dominates, where different sources dominate, and the Chinese story and the oceanic revised downward emission, which are also, I think, an important contribution of this budget. So going to the changes, you've already seen this 3 times, so I will not comment again a lot. We don't have all the same. It depends how close you are to ED. So Laurie has the one until 2016, so I have only the one until 2015 because yeah, he sent me very recently, but not as recent as you. So that's, so you can see who is who in the system, which is good. So let's look at, so we make inversions, we gather all the inversions, and we compare and produce this so-called noodle plate with inversion results. So these are anomalies from 2000 to 2012. This is the time period we targeted for the budget. Unfortunately, we don't go up to the last years, but we stop in 2012. And these are total global emissions from the different inversions. The dashed are from the satellite, and the others are from surface concentrations. Observations. So what we have here is really most of these inversions have either very small or no OH changes. This is an important factor, of course. I will come back to that later. And what you can see here is that although we have interannual variability, of course, before in 2000, it's kind of, we can't see any big clear trend. There is some increase in most overall, even all the inversions between 2006 and 2008. And then after again, a slow to no increase in emissions. Some are slowly increasing, some are not increasing. Still with, of course, difficult interannual variations that superpose on the total. So this kind of, we have a small shift, I mean, at this point in this 2006-2008 value. If we go to the anthropogenic versus natural, so again, the dark lines in these 2 anthropogenic natural anomalies of emissions are from the top down, the inversions, and then the lighter, let's say, lines here are from the bottom up. So either the inventories for anthropogenic emissions, or the 11 wetland models that produce this line here. So it's quite obvious that from the inverse point of view, you have an increase in the emissions, but which is less than what is inferred by inventory. So the inversion corrects downward the trend that you put at the beginning, or don't put, because some inversions don't put any trend in the prior knowledge, it depends. But it doesn't influence too much the result. You reduce really the trend in this emission increase for anthropogenic sources. And for the natural one, we have to be modest. For instance, you see that it's not very consistent. I don't say not at all, because some period is not so bad, but you see that, for instance, here you are kind of phase opposite between mid-2000s to mid-2010s. So at this point, we don't really understand why we have these discrepancies. For the bottom-up, for the bottom-up, what Ben did in his paper, I saw he arrived, I think he's in the room now. Yes. So we really gathered these different models, carbon cycle models, with recently developed inventory based on remote sensing data, the SWAMPS GLWT database. And from this, they produce long-term evolution of wetland, long-term, let's say 2012 evolution of wetland emissions. And they find no global trend, but there are some regional to hemispheric trend with an increase of 1.2 teragram per year in the boreal wetlands, mostly driven by temperature increase that you can see here. Be careful, the scales are inverted between temperature and water, as usual in these different communities. So red is more temperature, classically, but blue for here it's precipitation, and here it's the impact of wetland area, sorry. So blue is more water, and red is more temperature. Well, it's classical, but I just want to mention this. So they find this small increase in the boreal driven by temperature that you can see here in emission in blue. So bluish color here is more emissions. This is total methane emissions. So also you have some reddish colors in high latitude as well, but overall for the high latitude it's a small increase. and a small decrease in tropical emissions of about 1 teragram per year. In this case, it is due to wetland area decrease, so driven by this, mostly driven by this wetland area inventory used here. And you can see it here by the annual wetland area with reddish colors, more in the tropics, meaning reduction in the in the area where wetland emits methane. So going back to the previous slide, maybe not. Yes. So this is at least what explains this variation that we have in this bottom up. For the top down, we have again to be modest because usually people don't solve especially the different components of the methane cycle. So we retrieve it by some hypothesis on the combination of sources. So it's from the top-down point of view not very sure as well that we have this kind of variation. So there is an uncertainty here remaining that we will have to address for these wetland changes. So in the following, as you see, because of this kind of two periods, what I will present is the difference between these 2002-2006 years and the 2008-2012. So I will focus on the differences to somehow avoid the kind of internal variations that are quite uncertain, I would say, but perturb a bit the analysis of the signal. So making the differences, you have again this for all the regions that we spread the totals. So for the global and hemispheric scale, for the tropics, northern mid-latitudes and high latitudes. Again, on the left is the top-down inversion, so result, and on the right is the bottom-up aggregation that we get. So at the global scale, it's quite consistent. Uncertainties are still large again, but it's quite consistent with a 20 to 21 teragram anomaly per year, 20 teragram per year anomaly, which correspond to this shift of emission that you show here, about 20 teragrams between the two. But already at hemispheric scale, it's different. You see that for the top-down budget, it's mostly a tropical signal that we get. And as I said, for the bottom-up, it's mostly a mid-latitude signal driven by anthropogenic emission, and here it's a top-down signal driven by the tropics. So you have a discrepancy here between the top-down and the bottom-up. They don't agree for this location of the anomaly. And if you go to regional scale, of course, it's the same story because this builds to become hemispheric totals at the end. So for the top-down, you see a big contribution from South America. Whereas the bottom up, you have this large bar here in Asia, and again here in Asia, to have the explanation in the anthropogenic emission increase in Asia driven by the inventories. So the driver is a bit different. From the top down, South America is mostly natural wetlands. Wetlands, it's not natural wetlands. Sander, we exchanges on this, so mostly wetlands and not natural wetlands. And then here we have this mostly driven anthropogenic by inventories in the bottom-up approaches. So different story here, and we have a low agreement between the two approaches on the magnitude and location, so not very optimistic, of this perturbation in the different systems. If we go to the processes emitting methane, so again, it's the analysis of the anomaly of the change between the two time periods here that I show. So from wetlands, for other natural sources, for agriculture and waste, for biomass burning, and for fossil fuel, the different categories we made. And again, the left is the top down, the right is the bottom up. You have these boxes, and you see that it's quite difficult. Uncertainties are very large. If we start from the more confident to the less confident bars, you can see that the fact that there is a contribution from agriculture and waste seems to be consistent, although you have to be careful that, as for all sources, anthropogenic sources, top-down, they use bottom-up as prior. So this is a kind of a limitation of the interpretation, but still, half of the anomaly, 20 teragram anomaly, is found in this agriculture and waste. On the other quite sure side, let's say that biomass burning has been reduced, both from the bottom-up and top-down perspectives. And here it's a small reduction, but as it is isotopically very different from the total source, it's very consistent with the, it can be, I will show after, consistent with the isotopic decrease shown by Patrick and Laurie before. So this reduction of biomass burning, this was before 2015 and the big El Nino that we got, of course, and it is quite consistent with the reduction of fires that can be found, especially, for instance, in the GFED inventory, which is this bar mostly. So we have a reduction of that. Then after we enter in the more uncertain world, let's say with a contribution from wetlands, even in the top down, which is very uncertain, which is, as I said, null on average for the bottom up, because they find no trend, these 11 models forced by this swarm GLWD database. So there is no trend in the bottom up. There is some 0 to some 10 teragram, let's say, a contribution from the top down, so very uncertain depending on the models that are used in different inversions. Same uncertainty, maybe even worse for the anthropogenic fossil fuels. Inventory, I said Edgar is very high, and this is at the top here, so I will show things that it makes this bar will go lower in the future, but at the moment this is where we are. And from the top down, again, large variety from 0 contribution to this anomaly to also a 10 teragram contribution. So it's hard to draw a definitive conclusion, as Laurie said, on this synthesis. What we can say, the most, I would say, probable thing, if you consider the most likely, to talk as in the IPCC, but the most likely thing is that as you consider that here it's probably overestimated by inventories, these mid-latitudes, the most likely is that it is a tropical signal, but again, it's likely, it's not certain. And the fact that we have a microbial contribution which is strong, I mean, if you sum up this anthropogenic microbial and this more or less natural microbial, the total, and this which is mostly microbial as well, I didn't talk about the other sources that contributes a little to 0. The microbial contribution seems to be dominant. So microbial, tropical, well, this is where we are now, and with a contribution of reduced biomass burning. But the contribution of fossil fuel is very, very uncertain. So this is where we are. I say microbial sources. We'll show it is C13 compliant just after, either from agriculture or from wetlands or from both. Although here we have disagreements. Decrease in biomass burning, possible increase from fossil fuel, which is ethane compliant with the hypothesis below ethane, because there are, of course, hypotheses. Again, there is a disagreement between the approaches here I didn't show. And then the stagnation between OH and this I will show just after. So 2 things from this. We need more constraint. I mean, this is kind of obvious that we don't have enough constraint, enough kind of data. It's not only the number of data. We can always say we need more data, but we need different data as well. Either improve things for ethane or C13 to really feed the system with additional information, because we are limited. We have only methane, and we want to solve different type of sources, which it's under constraint at the end. It's obvious, but it's better to be said. And of course, something we learned also from the use of satellite data is that biases kill at the end, because if you have too many biases, something we didn't have with the surface data that we have now with the satellite, it's difficult to learn something very useful if you have too many biases you don't know how to correct. If you have biases you can correct, okay, fair enough, but if you don't know really how to correct them, at the end you cannot learn as much as you would like, of course. So I will go to some challenges now to finish the talk. I have some time. So yeah, Laurie, when you showed the comparison between the methane increase and the IPCC scenarios, you stopped at the IR4. But if you go to IR5, because each time they descope a bit, so now you are not so much in a good shape, because none of the scenarios, sorry, this is again between 2005 and 2020 here, the CH4 concentrations, as expected in different RCPs and as observed. So maybe we are a bit less increasing now here, but still it's quite fast increase. None of this basic scenario, are really compliant with the real observations that we have here. Although Laurie nicely showed before it was worse. So, okay, situation is not so bad compared to 20 years ago, but not so good compared to 5 or 7 years ago when these RCPs were made. So, okay, we have to deal with this. Well, it was already said, we have this increase of methane from 2000 to 2014 and a decrease in C13. And of course, it provides information and it's consistent, it was said by previous speakers, with microbial, so really discriminating sources, fractionating sources, the fact that you have a decrease here. We have this Ethane signal in the northern hemisphere, Ajoutspitze, and in the southern hemisphere with differences, hemispheric differences that can also bring additional information if the ratios Ethane to methane can be constrained properly. Here is the same, if the signature can be constrained properly, and maybe not with one number for the whole globe, at the end, we might learn something, but still we need data to constrain these regional discriminations on the C13 to be able to learn something from these observations. Else, it brings additional uncertainties as well, so it doesn't help you too much. So we have also exciting things coming up, and we have the project with Patrick to install some continuous C13 measurements in the Arctic. And here it's not observations yet, it's just model outputs from this polar shimmer model. We have kind of a lot of stations, surface station, although we might think it's not enough, but it's kind of some of stations around the Arctic. And here I've just plotted the del C13 that we can expect. It's a model view. Again, we have to be modest, but from different, at different stations and from different sources. So for instance, here, kind of signal one can expect from freshwater systems, mostly lakes in this case, in the, for instance, at Chersky here. Sorry, it's a mistake. No, it's not this. Sorry, my mistake. I mixed up things. Sorry. This is Churchill, so it's in Canada. Yeah, the arrow is not, well, whatever. I just want to illustrate that during the summer months and autumn months, you can have signals, it's small signals, 0.1 per mil, so it's quite challenging signals. For daily, this is daily values, daily concentrations. At TIXI for the wetlands, you have larger signal up to 0.5 per mil. I think the resolution of the instrument at like a few minutes resolution, it's like 0.1 per mil. So yeah, we need to aggregate and to aggregate observation probably for this to be consistent. Here it's more optimistic. And also you see that the phasing of the different sources are not the same. Here this is the wetlands, for instance, and here this is the oil and gas source. Here in Russia, and here also in Russia in different places. Sorry, the arrow is not correct. It's the YAC value. So you see that the signals coming from oil and gas areas in winter nicely at these two stations with quite large signals. It can be up to 0.3, quite large compared to what we can expect. Again, here at Zeppelin, where we plan eventually to restart the station, it's challenging. The wetland signal is 0.1 per mil, so quite small signals. So I think this kind of data, because of this continuous, in regions where you can separate mostly by season eventually, or by region clearly the observations, can be helpful in the future. So we have also new nice observations, this air core that was invented at NOAA by Peter Tans. So the principle is to have a tube, which is enrolled here in this little system. You see the size of the system compared to one person here. So like 70 meter, 100 meter, depending on the tube that you launch under a balloon. It goes up to 30 kilometers, and the air is filled out while the pressure diminishes. And then after, when the balloon explodes at like 20 to 30 kilometers, you fill, by going down after with a parachute, you fill the tube with air. And if you analyze it not too long after it falls onto the ground, you can retrieve, because diffusion is quite slow in this very thin tube, you can analyze an air core. It's a very clever way, very, very impressive thing. And we did some flights in Europe for this. We have these nice values for methane here, for instance, and it does also CO2, because you analyze it in the ground with a Picaro, so you can really have different gases analyzed. So we nicely see the fast decrease of methane after the tropopause. And if we zoom in, we could see some variations also at the low latitude. This is quite exciting data that could help us to analyze things. So as the Merlin PI, I have to talk about Merlin. It's in my contract, so sorry for that, but you will have one slide about the Merlin. So other exciting things for satellite. I didn't show many satellite data, but we are a bit now in difficulties because of these biases and systematic errors. And the idea with this satellite is to launch a LiDAR, so an active mission that generates its own light, laser with a laser, that goes to the surface or to the highest cloud, depending, of course, where we are. And then we analyze the retro back-diffused signal, back-scattered signal. And it's a differential measurement, so we really have a wavelength in a doublet of methane absorption and a wavelength which is not absorbed by methane. And these two factors, the fact that it is active and the fact that it is differential, should allow us to have a very challenging low bias at the end of less than 3.7 ppb, which is at the moment better than what passive instruments do. Maybe by the time we have better things with passive, but at least we have the hope to and this is necessary really to, I think, to learn something very useful at regional scale about emissions. So the first result indicate that we have on average error reduction, including systematic errors. It's important because usually error reduction with future satellite mission, they don't account for the impact of systematic errors, and this is what kills, I tell you before. So we have a reduction of factor of 2 on the uncertainty, which is better than GOSAT for most regions at the moment. So this is 2021, the launch, so today, because this is a new instrument, it's not developed yet. It's not another spectrometer or so on, it's really a new concept. So I don't sell the time of 2021, but it should be launched in 2021 at the moment. So we have this exciting data. We also have, of course, other missions. I have to be fair with colleagues. The next one will be the TROPOMI that should be launched in August. Sander told me, normally, if everything goes nice. That should provide some methane data. Then of course, we have the GOSAT-2 I've talked about, the Merlin, the geostationary project, GeoCarb, and then Sentinel-5 coming up. For CO2, I don't talk too much about CO2, but there are also a lot of projects. Well, I had a little joke here, but I'm not sure it is trumped. But we heard from Europe. Sorry, I'm not in the US, so I don't follow the news very close. But we heard that it was trumped, but that maybe not, because the Congress might, if the lobbying is good, might come back, or NASA will pay on its own funds at the end if the money, because it's only on the ISS, so it's maybe less expensive. I don't know, but whatever, sorry for that. It was a little joke before lunch, but again, improve the inventories, and I think this is one of the examples. There was another one for CO2 in the Austral Ocean back in the 90s, where there was a discrepancy between top-down and bottom-up, and at the end, the bottom-up corrected the values by doing more measurement on the field and looking at, okay, there was a problem. These top-down guys, they were right for once, and the atmospheric guys were right. So here, it's a bit some kind of the same. The EDGAR 2, I told you, these Chinese emissions were very high. From the atmosphere, we say for years now that it's too high. We cannot, the atmosphere cannot handle so many things coming from, at least coming from China. And this is here a comparison with the new version of EDGAR. It's some Grit Mahut, responsible at GRC, who gave me these values to show you. From the EDGAR 4.3.2 versus the 4.2. And this is the total from 2000 to 2012. This is total emission, this is total anthropogenic emission from different regions or countries. And here, this big change between EDGAR 4.2 here and EDGAR 4.3 here is China. So you see the reduction of both the value and the trend. And it will be more consistent, obviously, with inversion. There are other regions impacted. The gray here is temperate Asia, so mostly Russia also, you have some reduction. And if you do the difference, you see more clearly. So this is China, so it's big reduction. Russia also, and also a bit US. It's no trend, but they revise with a -5 teragram emission on average for the US emissions. And if you go by category, this is the total in red. This is the fossil, so really a reduction in fossil fuel emissions. So again, if you remember what I showed you about the analysis of the recent change, it goes in a good direction to make it a bit more consistent between the top-down and the bottom-up. And there is a small increase in wastewater, waste, I'm not sure it's water, waste sector by like 5 teragrams here that you can see on this total. So, okay, this goes in the good direction, I think, to reconcile a bit top down and bottom up. And to finish about OH, there are several papers on OH, it was mentioned already. This one was not mentioned, it was using chemistry transport models on the long term from the 70s, and they have this increase of OH and stagnation after the mid-2000s that could help, I would say, explaining the increase in the atmosphere. And of course, this recent paper that was shown by Michael, or not shown, but you talked about just before, and by Laurie as well, the fact that we have this in the 2000s from Rigby in 2017, this bump, this small bump of OH with an increase up to the mid-2000s and then a decrease. Of course, it's very noisy. You cannot discard the constant OH in this system, considering the uncertainties. But of course, depending if you account for this or not, the change in emissions, which is represented here, is different. If you are more the constant like OH, as was in the previous inversions I've shown you, because people in this inversion do not or only partly account for the OH changes, but you see that you find the emission we have, so quite constant in the 2000, then increase in 2006-8, and then quite again slowly increasing. And if you account for this OH, you have some more, you don't have this jump in 2006, this shift in 2006-2008 that is necessary. So this is quite large changes for OH, as was nicely shown by Michael. The models don't say it can vary that fast. So maybe, I mean, where we are today is the fact that OH might have helped to, not help, let's say that differently. OH might make the necessary source to explain the change in the atmosphere less strong. So maybe it's not a 20 teragram, maybe it's a 15 or a 10 teragram, but we think that at the moment it cannot explain all the change that we have in the past 10 years, let's say. Again, the model's improvements, just two illustrations of the issue we have with models. This is from the Prabir-Patras paper in 2011. You see the interhemispheric exchange difference here. This is some observations. And then this is the different models. So you see that they get the trend, but again, they don't get the absolute value right for methane. So we have some work to do here. Part of this has been now done, but still there are discrepancies. And this air core data, you see that most of the models don't reproduce the fast decrease in the stratosphere. This is vertical, and this is PPB, methane PPB. The data are in black. So most models, even very high resolution one like IFS and the ECMWF model with 160 something levels, they don't reproduce this. The only one that reproduces is the IFS, but after assimilation. So of course, this is the goal of the assimilation, to reproduce. This is why these two models are completely overlapping, but it's not the case for the other models. So we have work to do also, not only at the surface, but also in the stratosphere. Well, I will finish with this slide with some questions, some of them. The most obvious probably questions. So the estimation of inland waters, it's really critical if we want to narrow down the uncertainties for the bottom up. The vegetation emissions seem to come back on stage after some hot stuff in the 2000s, but I've wrote some more recent papers on this also. The monitoring of the atmosphere in major regions, we really need to know if the future satellite mission can help on this, because we're quite sure the surface, it will be difficult to go everywhere, of course. How can we attribute the recent changes? Of course, this is one of the quick questions we already got several times. The acceleration of increase in the two recent years, 2014, 2015, it was a two-digit increase per year, 10, 12, and 10, I think, ppb per year. So, and of course, the role of OH. The challenge, really, we need to maintain and enrich the monitoring capabilities, enrich with additional constraint. Without additional constraint, I don't think we can really go very far at this point. Improve the chemistry transport model, we say, develop the process-based modeling for natural emissions, because so far we have wetland models, we see it's difficult, but for other sources that might be important, like fresh waters, we don't have process models at the moment at global scale. And this is really a priority for me that they develop such models. And of course, we have to be successful in this very exciting project we get. For the GCP Global Carbon Project, we really have some initiative within this Moore grant we have about trying to build some starting or going towards FluxNet methane, because it has been very useful for CO2 to have this FluxNet database to fit the models and to really constrain the models and calibrate the land surface models. And for methane, we lack this, so we need to develop. We would like to focus also on inland waters things, on OH, trying to provide the modelers with a kind of useful OH field, try to find some compromise in the variability to really address this question of OH. We plan also to reboost the Transcom experiment. There is a meeting scheduled in August on behalf of the ICDC conference in Switzerland. So I think this Transcom experiment is very important to maintain the motivation to improve transport model on the physical part. And we have the space missions, TROPOMI this year, and Merlin in 2021. So exciting missions that hopefully will help us to narrow down the uncertainties on the global methane budget. And I will stop here. I thank you for your attention.